Hi, everyone. This is Justin Olbrantz,
And this is Don Schaefer.
and you are listening to the Wise and the Wandering podcast. For those who know the way, and for those who are led astray. And if you feel like you fall into either of those categories, then you're in the right place. So let's dive in. So, Don, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I think we're going to talk about forgiveness brings freedom.
Forgiveness brings freedom.
That's right.
Oh, that's a tough one.
That
Forgiveness.
is. So that means that we're locked up or we're not free until we find forgiveness.
Yes, we are maybe enslaved to something.
Yes.
We are indebted to something.
Something's got a hold of us.
Right, and we need freedom.
Yeah.
And I would say, speaking of forgiveness, I hope that our listeners right now have some forgiveness over us, because if you're following along, it's been roughly, 4 weeks since actually putting out an episode?
Yeah, it's been a good piece.
And mainly this was because of moving our production of our microphones and stuff back from Florida into Wisconsin, where we record these episodes.
Yep.
But also, if you've been following along in earlier episodes and you knew my mother's journey through cancer and some of the times that I mentioned that, my mother did sadly pass away in late February. So that's also a process that I've been dealing with, grieving process. And, that's been a struggle in itself to put together podcast episodes. But nonetheless, we persist. And because of that, I will be having an episode in the maybe not near future, but in the future that deals with grieving. Yeah. And we'll talk about that more. But for now, we're going to talk about forgiveness.
That's right.
That is the topic at hand. And this is going to be a 3-part series. Yeah. So we're going to do a 3-part series. This is a little different than what we've done in the past on the podcast here, but we're going to have a 3-part series, which is going to be highlighting all different aspects on ways that forgiveness can bring freedom and focus and fruit to your life. You like that F alliteration?
Yep.
Yeah, I like the alliterations. I tend to stay with those. So we're going to talk about that. So I guess we'll get right into it. Forgiveness is a hard thing.
It really is.
Forgiveness is something that I think that everybody needs in their life. And I guess, Don, in your perspective, in your boomer perspective, right, what does forgiveness mean to you?
Well, Justin, forgiveness for me is, if you get in a situation where you've been wronged or somebody's hurt you in some way or whatever the circumstance might be, sometimes you get an attitude, things start to happen inside you and, you're just not free. You don't have the freedom. You look at a young child, until they've had issues against them, they're free and they're happy and all this, but unforgiveness bottles itself up inside. And, the message I know we have here, I think, is a message that a lot of people are comfortable not knowing because they don't want to do anything in their life. But, to have true freedom, you have to understand how important forgiveness really is and what it can do. Because you have an inner enemy inside you that sometimes binds you up and it keeps you from being the person that you were meant to be. And, a lot of times just walking in life, I can see where people are dealing with this by their attitudes, by their facial expressions, sometimes the way they walk. Unforgiveness really harms an individual. And
people walk around with it on their face.
They
can see
they
it.
do. And I know Jesus himself, he said he came to set the captives free.
Yeah.
Well, in Scripture, it doesn't show him going to all the prisons and getting the doors opened up. No, what he did is he spoke to people. And this is one element, I think, that he came to bring mankind, is the ability to forgive. Because everything we would want from God, it takes some sort of him forgiving us, but also us forgiving those who have done harm to us. And it's a tough spot sometimes for people to be in.
Yeah. I know on a previous episode, I made a reference about, and it was kind of a strange reference, but it just came to me at the time. And it was about how we need to, or it was a proposal actually. And it was kind of like how we could forgive God.
Yeah.
And it was because God forgave us, right? Because the whole purpose of Jesus coming to the world and dying on the cross
Yeah.
was for our forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I think that just the concept of forgiving God is basically not that you're trying to like put yourself on a pedestal over God, but I'd say it's like it's a tool to empathize with your past.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think in order to let go of the past, there has to be forgiveness. But I think a lot of people are strung up from religious people or certain things that might have happened to them in religious settings.
Yeah.
And it's caused them to, like you said, have that bitterness, that resentment.
Right.
And they need forgiveness.
Yeah,
They need freedom.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to bring this up because I found this interesting, and I read this in a book somewhere, but it said, the human is the only animal on earth that pays 1,000 times for the same mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we punish ourselves over and over again every time we are reminded of the mistake, the same mistake.
Yeah.
And I think that's so interesting because, it said we're the only animal, right? So we'll punish ourselves. We're the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury in our own mind, and we'll punish ourselves 1,000 times for the same exact thing.
That's right.
When the squirrel falls out of the tree, right? It doesn't hold it against itself and say, "Man, I was so dumb for falling out of that tree."
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But yet we do the same thing to ourselves over and over again.
Yeah.
So I think one of the areas that we find freedom is by forgiving ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a little bit sometimes easier said than done, but I think that when you can be accountable for everything that happened in your life and kind of understand that you are the only one who takes account for it, not necessarily saying that you deserved what happened and not necessarily speaking against boundaries that you've created because of things that happened in your past, but when you can be fully accountable and know that, you were forgiven by God and there is grace for you, you can forgive yourself and you can let go and move forward.
This is true. Yeah, this is true. And like you had mentioned a little bit about people that condemn other people.
Yeah.
And sometimes, we have a part of our world that thinks that they've got the corner on God, so they can judge everybody and condemn anybody they want. And sometimes it creates more issues than anything. The Bible tells us we're supposed to love our neighbors and treat them kindly. But a lot of times, like you're saying there, Justin, there is unforgiveness that gets built up inside of a person. And we're never really at peace with ourselves because you're talking about being able to forgive ourselves because God didn't make us perfect. He made us to make mistakes and we're good at it. We're good at making mistakes. We're good at doing things wrong. Sometimes I find if there's two ways of doing it, I always do it wrong first time. It seems like you just fall into it.
That happens to me too.
Yeah, but when you get into a place where not only do you forgive yourself, but you can forgive those that are around you. And I think Jesus came to be an example. That is one area that was brought and given to us because up until that time, the Jews hated the Romans and the Romans hated the Samaritans and the Gentiles and all this. There was constant conflict going on.
Yeah.
But Jesus came and he brought love. No matter how poorly he was treated, I know on the cross, he says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." Forgiveness is huge in our lives and we get ourselves all bound up in it. It's the greatest enemy we have is unforgiveness because there's all the things that a lot of times people struggle with. You get into alcohol, you get into, anger, you get into bitterness. A lot of this stuff is basically unforgiveness because you've been hurt or somebody's done you wrong in some way and you can't forgive them. And the hard thing in the Bible, Justin, is where it talks about the fact that God can't forgive you unless you can forgive your neighbor.
Yeah.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah, it's tough.
Because you talk about God coming and forgiving our wrongs, but we have to be able to forgive, and if we can't get ourselves to that point, we're in a tough spot. And that's where a lot of individuals in life, I hate to say this, but you can go to church once a week, But if you harbor unforgiveness and bitterness and all the attributes, you're not free. I mean,
Right.
you're trying, but there is a release. And that's what Jesus came. When he said he came to set the captives free, there is a true freedom in being able to forgive the wrongs done to me.
Yeah, and I think when you get released, when you mention being released, I think you're being released from your past.
Yeah.
A lot of the times,
Oh,
things
yeah.
that you've held on to, there's no longer a bondage to your past, experiences, feelings, and like any possible trauma that might have been associated with it. I think forgiveness is uniquely a Christian doctrine itself, right?
I would think so. Yeah, I would
Yeah.
think so.
And I think even the Bible talks about, when Jesus talks about it, and he says, how often should you forgive your neighbor if he sins against you 7 times in a day,
Yeah.
and you forgive him 7 times in that day.
Oh, yeah. There's no end to it.
Yeah, and
Because
that's
you have to.
yeah, and I think he even says something about 77 times at
70
7
times
times.
7.
Yeah.
It's huge. That was Peter that he was talking to.
Yeah.
Peter thought he could get away with only forgiving a couple times, and then he'd justify himself by not forgiving, where Jesus basically said, you got to forgive no matter what.
Yeah, because you're holding on to something.
Yeah.
You're holding on to something, and because you're holding on to something, you can't receive something,
Yeah.
right? So you have to let go, and I think that's kind of the point of it is forgiveness is going to bring freedom into your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one way of doing that, we're going to just chop this down, right? So one way of doing that is, in my opinion, you forgive God, right? If you have any kind of resentment in your heart, if there's a misrepresentation of who God actually is in your life, or who you've been taught who God is or who Jesus is, find that forgiveness, because he found it for you, right?
Yep.
Then there's forgiving yourself. I think this is often not talked about, and this is often just not thought about, because we think of forgiveness of always just having to forgive other people. But there is, if, like you said, if there's forgiveness in your heart in some kind, it's going to stop you. That is some kind of, there is some bondage there.
That's
if there's
right.
any kind of unforgiveness. So if it's something that happened to you in your past, if there's something, if there's a very unfortunate situation that you've been through in your life, then you just have to forgive yourself and understand that you can move forward.
That's true.
I think then the third part is forgiving other people. So there's a 3-part system here, right? And I think once you have that down, that might be one of the hardest ones, to be honest with you, forgiving other people, because it is easy to feel those emotions, like you were saying, like bitterness. It's really easy to just let your anger control you. It's easy to let your ego get in the way.
Get even.
Yeah, get even, exactly. And I guess you talked about earlier a little bit about how unforgiveness manifests, how it manifests itself into anger in your life.
Yeah,
I guess let's talk a little bit about anger. What would you want to say about that?
Well, anger is caused by hurts, and things that have been wrong in your life, and you not knowing how to forgive the offender that has caused all this. But I find that a lot of times the human life is like a huge warehouse. And a lot of times we stack things. This has gone wrong. That's gone wrong. This is, pretty soon we got a whole warehouse full of things that are making us angry, our hurts, our pains. They're all stacked up. We've got them inventoried. We've got them labeled. We sit back and we think about all this. That's where I know
That's a good analogy. I like that.
Yeah, going down the road, sometimes you see people that get into road rage. We're doing some stupid stuff on the road.
Yeah, I can't say that's ever happened to me before.
But you get into that and you wonder where the root cause was. Was this something that happened just on the road, or were they primed up for it? Have they stacked enough hurts and pains inside of them that they are a walking time bomb? And that's what anger is. It's a walking time bomb, an individual that has been injured in life. And that's all it takes is one situation, because you don't want to be around these individuals that are walking time bomb. They do crazy stuff, and all of a sudden they see red. and that's where they're not free. I mean, they have a hard time
Right.
being happy. They have
Yeah.
a hard time being, just comfortable with themselves
Yeah.
because they got all this warehouse of stuff stacked up, and that's where Jesus, he says, I want to clean out that warehouse because you'll never be free. God will never set you free unless you can learn how to forgive. You come to God for forgiveness because you know you did wrong, but you have to be able to forgive those that have offended you too. And it's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's been hard for myself. I can honestly say that anger used to manifest itself a lot in my life
Yeah.
before I was saved.
Yeah. Me too. Me too.
I used to go into, I would say, bouts of rage, and I had some definitely unpleasant times, things that I maybe said and did that I am not proud of.
Mm-hmm.
But getting back to that point, it's forgiving yourself.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I've already been forgiven for those things, right? Everything, anything that has happened to me in my past, anything that I've said and done, I'm forgiven for, because I've found that relationship with God in my life.
Yeah.
I found that relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think you can't fully forgive other people the right way unless you have that relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
I think so, because Jesus helps you, like you were saying, the whole purpose of him coming to the world and saying, I've come to set the captives free. I mean,
That's right.
that phrase has multiple meanings.
It does.
But one of them is to completely break those yokes, break those strongholds that have been held over you, and break those feelings of resentment and anger and sadness and depression and all these things that are kind of branching off of a root cause of unforgiveness.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just very important to keep that in mind, because there's so much freedom. There's so much. Well, we're going to talk more in the next couple episodes about once you get out of this bondage, and now you have a new heightened focus. You have a new level of focus in your life, and you can really start focusing on things. But up until then, you're kind of stuck, and you can go your entire life.
Oh, yeah.
You can go your entire life living in unforgiveness.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and that's where I know the Bible tells us that if we want to come to God, that we have to forgive. The Bible says that whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. So, I mean, if I'm harboring anything against anyone, and I'm supposed to be coming to a place of prayer and a place where God is supposed to, see, we give an opportunity for God to show up, and it's a process. That's the beauty of life. You study the processes, you study the patterns, and you find that it's all about finding ways to forgive. And like Justin was, like you were mentioning earlier about being able to forgive yourself. You'll never have peace. You'll never have happiness until you can come to God and allow yourself to be cleansed. Forgive me, Lord, for the things I do. But it's that guy next door. It's what the way he lays his trash can, the way he rakes his leaves, all this stuff. You start harboring these attitudes, and that's where God is trying to say, if I'm going to live with you, if I'm going to show up, you better learn how to love your neighbor and be able to forgive those who have wronged you in any way. I know myself. I a lot of times people do me wrong and they got bad attitudes or whatever. And I always say, God bless them. I am not going to get upset over this. They are who they are.
Right.
Like Jesus says, forgive them for they know not what they do. They don't know. They don't know, how to handle their life and the things they do, and they're dumping their garbage all over the place. But now, if I harbor any type of bitterness, anger, or whatever, and I'm not forgiving towards that individual, and I'm expecting God to show up in my life. The Bible says He doesn't do that. And that's where we have to watch the patterns. We have to watch our lives, because if we can't get ourselves into loving people, no matter who they are and what they do, it's hard. The Bible talks about we heap, coals on top of the heads of people that have wronged us.
Yeah.
And the way we do that, we do kind things. Because I remember my daughter when she was young, and somebody was doing something. Well, you need to treat that individual. Buy her a candy bar or something. And she says, "Dad, I can't do that, because this guy here is doing this, that." But it changes things.
Yeah.
When you start to love your offender, and forgive your offender, it changes a relationship. And she did that. And she had she's still friends with some of these girls.
Yeah. And like you were saying that's tough. And that's something that once you do it, once you do anything that involves having freedom on the other end, it's going to be tough.
Oh, yeah.
It's not going to be an easy process.
Yep.
What's easy is sticking with what you're already doing and running from your problems, avoiding the issue at its core and where it starts, right? And where it was allowed to fester and grow into a whole different beast. Mm-hmm. And I would even like to say, you talked about you can't harbor any kind of anger towards anybody in order to successfully, walk in peace and just, I would say, live a peaceful life, right? We almost all of us have one person that we are angry with. And with some of us, it's ourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
Really, we can be our own worst critic. We can speak, self-talk. The way we talk to ourselves and our minds is often a reflection of the way we speak about other people. When you see someone in the way they insult people, maybe it's on like social media or something like that, the way they insult people and the way they judge people is often the same. It's a mirror image of how they actually judge themselves and how they insult themselves. Yeah. They are very hard on themselves, and there's a barrier there, and that forgiveness can completely change your perspective. Yeah. It can completely change your mindset from a negative to a positive. And like you were talking about attitudes, it'll completely change your attitude. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it takes being the person that is the bigger person. Sometimes it takes being the bigger person. Yeah. It takes being the person that says, like you were saying, loving your offender. Yeah. And in some situations that can be tough, but that could spark something so beautiful just by finding a way to do that, to be the person that initiates that and says, you know what? No, I'm no longer going to let this rule over me. I'm no longer going to let this have a hold over me and my life because I'm the only one who this is keeping up at night. The person maybe that offended me or the person that was on the other side of this, that they're not losing sleep at night. Mm-hmm. I'm the only life that's being affected to this point.
That's true.
So it might be time to just take accountability and find that forgiveness for that person or yourself and then just move on.
Yep. But this is not easy.
No.
This is a battle going on. We look at the ugliness of war. A lot of people say war is HELL, and that is so true. And like you're saying, so many times we get comfortable in our own skin. Our issues, our problems and stuff, we just don't do anything about it. It's just the way I am. And that's where the beauty of the gospel, the good news, saying there is something better than that, but it isn't going to be an easy ride. You have to really want this. You really have to want to be free. You really have to cry out and say, you know what? I just do not like what I feel inside of me. There's a battle going on between my ears. I got people talking to me. I got myself talking to me. I got dark spots in my life, where I think dark things. Jesus came to solve all that, because the more unforgiveness we get, everybody's our enemy. We're constantly, instead of walking into a room looking for the good things in people, we're looking for the bad things in people. Yep. It gives us a whole different outlook in life. And that's a hard life to live, but we get comfortable. Our society, a lot of people are very comfortable. A lot of people are taking their own lives because they don't know how to forgive and how to set themselves free in these areas.
Yeah, it's so sad. And I guess I would just wrap that up to say that on the other end of that forgiveness is your freedom.
Yeah.
and it's just, it's going to be something that maybe feels like stepping out. It's going to feel different. It's going to feel like a chore. It's going to feel like work because it is.
Yeah.
Because there is a spiritual element to that. And there is powers that are trying to keep you stuck in that predictable state of just responding the same way to the same things and falling into the same patterns, into the same destructive habits.
That's right.
And it's a matter of beating that and going against that because you want to be free. You don't want to live in slavery, mental slavery. I feel like, when we talk about being enslaved or being in bondage, your mind becomes like a mental prison when you just repeat these offenses over and over in your mind, and you hold them over yourself, and you hold them against other people, and there's certain things that allow you to not let go of that. So on the other end of that, forgiveness is your freedom.
It really is. It really is. And that's where we really have to, this is an action message. This isn't an information message. It's an action. 100%. It requires action on our parts, and I know myself, I need to examine when I get my attitudes, when I get my anger, why is this? What am I not doing? Is there people that are wronging me, and am I hanging on to the pain of this, or am I learning how to forgive them, realizing that they don't really realize that. They don't know they're harming me, or they've been hurt themselves, so they continue hurting people, but it's never going to end in my life. I'm never going to be free unless I let the one that sets people free set me free. And the only way I can do that is ask for forgiveness and learning how to forgive other people.
Yeah. Ask and you shall receive.
That is absolutely right, Justin.
Seek and you shall find.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's the way of going about it. And I would just say, Don, out of your entire lifetime, just to ask you a question here, I guess tell me one thing out of all of your experiences that you've learned about forgiveness.
That I've learned about forgiveness. Okay. Well, I've learned it in my personal life that I've learned about being free in life and having a positive attitude and being joyful, keeping smiles on my faces. Because there was a time where I didn't know some of this stuff, and people bothered me, and I was afraid to go places because I was afraid to get hurt. Now I have no problems talking to people or going places because there is a freedom. I can go wherever I want. I don't have to wake up in the morning saying, you know what, nobody better cross me today because, man, I get hurt easy, and I don't get offended like I used to, like you could offend me. See, when you're walking where you need to be in God, you don't get offended. People can say what they want. God bless them. They can say what they want, but you don't walk away with an attitude and hurting and pain and wrecking. That's why I tell people, you're not going to wreck my day. Because I used to take care of parts and stuff at my company, and I get phone calls and they'd say, Don, I'm going to ruin your day. And I said, you think you're going to ruin my day? I said, I don't think so, because I have to allow you to wreck my day. You can't do it, and that's where I learned an attitude where I didn't allow people to rain on my parade. When you have
total control over things.
I did,
And because you have help from above, there's a relationship there where I think there's that peace that you carry with you. Yep. So nobody can take that from you.
No, and it makes everybody around you feel good about themselves. I mean, it's more than just you. If you allow you to be fixed, you help other people to be fixed too. It just creates an atmosphere. And that's the beauty of forgiveness, the freedom of forgiveness. And there isn't a lot of people that are totally free. There are a lot of attitudes. I know we're living in times right now. There's a lot of stuff going on in our world right now that shows all the bondage that people are in.
Yeah, we're living in a lot of bondage. There's a lot of crazy things happening in the world. I would say this is a good perspective on how forgiveness can bring you out of a life of suffering and setback and decline and bring you to a life of abundance and prosperity and peace.
And peace.
And I think that's the ultimate goal. So I think next week we'll talk about how that peace brings you into a greater focus to start really bringing fruit into your life.
That sounds good, Justin.
Well, I think that wraps it up for today.
This was a good one, Justin.
I think so too. Hey, we're glad you guys found your way here today, and we hope you can join us again next week for another good word. Until then, stay blessed.
By the best.
See you guys.